What if I told you that one of the world's most peaceful nations was forged through centuries of brutal warfare, shocking betrayals, and impossible military victories against Europe's greatest superpowers? Today, we're diving deep into the epic saga of Switzerland, a story so incredible that if it were fiction, you'd call it completely unbelievable. Picture this: a small collection of mountain farmers and herders, armed with nothing but primitive weapons and sheer determination, somehow managed to defeat the mighty Holy Roman Empire, the French, and countless other European giants. They built a nation that would become synonymous with neutrality, precision, and prosperity, all while sitting at the crossroads of continental power struggles for over 700 years. But here's what most people don't know about Switzerland's origin story. It wasn't born from noble ideals or peaceful negotiations. No, this nation was literally baptized in blood, forged through some of the most shocking military upsets in European history, and shaped by betrayals that would make Game of Thrones look tame. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a handful of mountain communities created what might be the most successful nation-building project in human history. Let's start at the very beginning. In the mists of ancient history, long before Switzerland existed, these alpine regions were inhabited by Celtic tribes, particularly the Helvetii, whose name still echoes in Switzerland's official Latin name, Confederatio Helvetica. These weren't your typical peaceful mountain dwellers. The Helvetii were fierce warriors who caught the attention of none other than Julius Caesar himself. In 58 BCE, the Helvetii made a decision that would echo through history. They decided to migrate westward, abandoning their mountain homes to seek new territories in Gaul. But Caesar had other plans. He intercepted them at the Battle of Bibracte, crushing their migration dreams and forcing the survivors back into the mountains. This defeat would shape the region's psychology for centuries to come, creating a deep-seated understanding that survival meant staying put and defending what you had. Roman rule brought roads, cities, and civilization to the Alps, but it also brought something else: the realization that these mountain passes were incredibly valuable. Whoever controlled the alpine routes controlled trade between northern and southern Europe. The Romans built fortifications, established settlements, and for nearly 4 centuries, these mountains were part of the greatest empire the world had ever seen. But empires fall, and when Rome crumbled in the 5th century, the power vacuum created chaos. Germanic tribes swept through the region. The Alemanni occupied the northern areas, while the Burgundians settled in the west. These weren't just migrations. They were complete cultural transformations that laid the groundwork for Switzerland's future linguistic divisions. Then came the Franks, and with them, a new chapter began. Under Charlemagne's empire, these alpine regions were incorporated into the Holy Roman Empire, setting up the political dynamic that would eventually lead to Switzerland's dramatic birth. Local nobles were granted lands and titles, creating a feudal system that would soon face its greatest challenge. Here's where our story takes its first dramatic turn. By the late 13th century, the Holy Roman Empire was struggling to maintain control over its far-flung territories. Local administrators, called bailiffs, were given increasing power to govern remote regions. But power corrupts, and these bailiffs began treating their subjects less like citizens and more like property. In the remote mountain valleys of Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden, something unprecedented was brewing. These weren't typical medieval subjects. The harsh alpine environment had forged them into fiercely independent communities. They had their own traditions of local governance, their own ways of settling disputes, and their own ideas about freedom that clashed dramatically with imperial authority. The breaking point came with the arrival of bailiffs who pushed their authority too far. According to legend, and here's where history blends with mythology, a bailiff named Hermann Gessler demanded that all residents bow before his hat, which he had placed on a pole in the town square. When William Tell, a local hunter, refused to bow, Gessler forced him to shoot an apple off his son's head with his crossbow. Now, whether William Tell actually existed is hotly debated by historians, but the story represents something much deeper and more important: the moment when these mountain communities decided they'd had enough. They weren't going to bow to imperial authority anymore, literally or figuratively. On August 1st, 1291, Representatives from Uri, Schweiz, and Unterwalden met in secret and signed what would become known as the Federal Charter. This document, written in Latin on parchment that still exists today, was essentially a declaration of independence disguised as a defensive alliance. They promised to help each other resist outside interference and to govern themselves according to their own laws and customs. But here's what makes this moment so extraordinary. These weren't powerful kingdoms or wealthy city-states making this declaration. These were small, poor mountain communities with no armies, no treasures, and no powerful allies. What they had was something far more dangerous to the established order: an unshakable belief in their right to self-determination. The Holy Roman Empire's response was swift and brutal. Emperor Albert I sent armies to crush this rebellion before it could spread. What happened next defied every expectation and established Switzerland's reputation for military excellence that would persist for centuries. At Morgarten in 1315, a small Swiss force of about 1,500 men faced off against a Habsburg army of over 9,000 heavily armored knights and professional soldiers. By every military calculation of the time, this should have been a massacre. The Swiss were outnumbered, outgunned, and outclassed, but they had two advantages their enemies couldn't match. They knew their terrain intimately, and they were fighting for their homes. The Swiss used the narrow mountain pass to negate the Habsburg cavalry advantage, then unleashed a weapon that would become their signature, the halberd. This long-handled axe could punch through armor and pull knights from their horses. When the battle ended, the Habsburg army was completely destroyed, and the Swiss had announced to all of Europe that they were a force to be reckoned with. But military victory was just the beginning. What happened next was a masterclass in medieval diplomacy and expansion. Rather than resting on their laurels, the three original cantons began attracting new members to their confederation. Cities like Lucerne, Zurich, and Bern saw the advantages of joining this defensive alliance and brought their own resources and strategic locations into the growing confederation. Each new addition brought unique strengths. Zurich contributed wealth and trade connections. Bern brought military expertise and territorial ambitions. Lucerne provided crucial control over important trade routes. But perhaps most importantly, each new member also brought their own traditions of self-governance, creating a complex but resilient political system that could adapt to changing circumstances. The Confederation's military reputation grew with each conflict. At Sempach in 1386, they crushed another Habsburg army, this time developing new tactics that would revolutionize European warfare. The Swiss Pike Square, a dense formation of soldiers wielding long pikes, became virtually unstoppable on the battlefield. These weren't just tactics, they were innovations born from necessity and perfected through survival. But here's what's truly remarkable about this period. While the Swiss were becoming military legends, they were also developing political innovations that were centuries ahead of their time. The Confederation operated on principles of mutual consent, shared defense, and local autonomy that wouldn't become common in Europe until much later. They were essentially creating modern federalism, while the rest of Europe was still stuck in feudal hierarchies. The 15th century brought the Confederation face to face with its greatest challenge yet. The Burgundian Wars. Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, was one of Europe's most powerful rulers, commanding professional armies and wielding wealth that dwarfed anything the Swiss could muster. His goal was simple: crush the Swiss Confederation and establish Burgundian dominance over the Alpine passes. What followed were three battles that would echo through history. At Grandson in 1476, the Swiss not only defeated the Burgundian army, but captured so much treasure that ordinary soldiers became wealthy overnight. At Morat later that year, they inflicted such a devastating defeat on Charles's forces that contemporary chronicles described the battlefield as carpeted with bodies. The final confrontation came at Nancy in 1477, where Charles the Bold himself was killed, ending Burgundian power forever. But these victories came with a price. The Swiss had proven they could defeat anyone on the battlefield, but they had also attracted the attention of every major power in Europe. France, the Holy Roman Empire, and other kingdoms now saw the Swiss as either valuable allies or dangerous enemies. The early 16th century marked a turning point in Swiss history. Their military reputation had grown so formidable that European powers began competing for Swiss mercenaries. Swiss soldiers, known for their discipline, courage, and effectiveness, became the most sought-after troops in Europe. This created a new economic model for the Confederation, exporting military expertise. But mercenary service also brought new challenges. Swiss soldiers found themselves fighting on opposite sides of European conflicts, sometimes even facing each other in battle. The most tragic example came at the Battle of Marignano in 1515, where Swiss forces fighting for different employers clashed with devastating results. This experience taught the Confederation a crucial lesson about the dangers of getting too involved in other people's wars. The Protestant Reformation brought entirely new tensions to the Confederation. When reformers like Huldrych Zwingli began preaching in Zurich, they created divisions that threatened to tear the Confederation apart. Some cantons embraced the new Protestant teachings, while others remained staunchly Catholic. These weren't just religious differences. They represented fundamentally different visions of society, governance, and individual rights. The religious wars that followed tested the Confederation's unity like never before. The Battle of Kappel in 1531, where Zwingli himself was killed, demonstrated how religious divisions could turn Confederates into enemies. But rather than destroying the Confederation, these conflicts ultimately led to one of its greatest innovations, the principle of religious coexistence. Through a series of peace agreements, the Swiss developed a system where different cantons could practice different religions while remaining united for defense and trade. This was revolutionary in an age when most of Europe believed that religious unity was essential for political stability. The Swiss proved that diversity could be a source of strength rather than weakness. The 30 Years' War, which devastated much of Europe from 1618 to 1648, marked another crucial moment in Swiss development. While neighboring regions were torn apart by religious and political warfare, Switzerland remained largely neutral, focusing on internal development and economic growth. This neutrality wasn't just a policy choice. It was a survival strategy that would define Swiss identity for centuries to come. The Peace of Westphalia, in 1648, formally recognized Swiss independence from the Holy Roman Empire. But by this point, the recognition was largely symbolic. The Swiss had been functioning as an independent nation for over 3 centuries, developing their own institutions, their own diplomatic relations, and their own approach to governance that set them apart from the rest of Europe. The 18th century brought new challenges in the form of Enlightenment ideas about centralized government and national unity. The old Confederation, with its complex web of local autonomies and traditional privileges, seemed increasingly outdated to some reformers. These tensions came to a head when Napoleon's armies swept across Europe, bringing revolutionary ideas about equality, centralization, and modernization. In 1798, French forces invaded Switzerland, ending the old Confederation and establishing the Helvetic Republic. This new state, modeled on French revolutionary principles, attempted to centralize power and eliminate the traditional autonomies that had defined Swiss political life. The experiment was a disaster. The Swiss had spent centuries developing a system that worked for their unique circumstances, and attempts to impose foreign models led to chaos and resistance. The collapse of the Helvetic Republic led to a period called the Mediation, where Napoleon himself helped establish a new Swiss constitution that balanced centralization with local autonomy. This experience taught the Swiss valuable lessons about the importance of organic political development and the dangers of importing foreign governmental models. The Congress of Vienna in 1815 recognized Swiss neutrality as a European interest, formally acknowledging that a neutral Switzerland served everyone's purposes. This recognition came with guarantees of Swiss territorial integrity, but it also came with responsibilities. Neutrality wasn't just a policy. It was a commitment that required constant vigilance and careful diplomacy. The 19th century saw Switzerland transform from a loose confederation into a modern federal state. The Federal Constitution of 1848 created a system that balanced cantonal autonomy with national unity, direct democracy with representative government. and individual rights with collective responsibilities. This wasn't just political innovation. It was the culmination of centuries of Swiss political evolution. But creating a modern state also meant dealing with modern challenges. The Industrial Revolution brought new economic opportunities and new social tensions. The growth of railways connected Swiss communities like never before, but also opened them to outside influences. Immigration began changing the demographic composition of some regions. While emigration saw Swiss communities established around the world, the American Civil War provided an unexpected test of Swiss neutrality and values. When the Union and Confederacy both sought European support, Switzerland had to navigate carefully between competing demands while maintaining its principles. The Swiss response, supporting the Union's anti-slavery position while maintaining formal neutrality, demonstrated how neutral nations could still have moral positions. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw Switzerland develop its modern identity as a center of international cooperation. The establishment of the International Red Cross in Geneva, founded by Swiss humanitarian Henry Dunant, marked Switzerland's emergence as a neutral ground for addressing global problems. This role would expand throughout the 20th century, with Geneva becoming a major center for international organizations and diplomacy. World War I presented Switzerland with its greatest test of neutrality, surrounded by warring powers, with internal divisions between German-speaking Swiss who sympathized with Germany and French-speaking Swiss who supported France. The country had to navigate unprecedented challenges. General Henri Guisan's leadership and the policy of armed neutrality kept Switzerland independent while all around it, Europe tore itself apart. The interwar period brought new challenges in the form of economic depression and the rise of fascism. Switzerland had to balance its democratic values with the practical requirements of survival in an increasingly hostile environment. The country's response, maintaining democratic institutions while taking defensive precautions, demonstrated the resilience of Swiss political culture. World War II pushed Swiss neutrality to its absolute limits. Surrounded by Axis powers, Switzerland found itself in an impossible position. The country's survival strategy involved a combination of military preparedness, economic cooperation with all sides, and careful diplomacy designed to make invasion too costly to be worthwhile. The National Redoubt strategy, which prepared for guerrilla warfare in the Alps, sent a clear message that conquering Switzerland would be a Pyrrhic victory at best. The post-war period saw Switzerland emerge as a major international player despite its small size. The country's stability, neutrality, and expertise in finance and diplomacy made it an ideal location for international organizations and conferences. Geneva and Zurich became global centers, while Swiss expertise in everything from pharmaceuticals to precision manufacturing earned worldwide recognition. But perhaps most remarkably, Switzerland also became a laboratory for direct democracy. The Swiss system of referendums and citizen initiatives created a form of government where ordinary people could directly influence policy on issues from taxation to foreign relations. This wasn't just theoretical democracy. It was practical self-governance that engaged citizens in ways that representative democracies often couldn't. The late 20th century brought globalization, challenges that tested traditional Swiss approaches to governance and neutrality. How could a small, neutral nation maintain its independence in an increasingly interconnected world? The Swiss response involved selective integration with international institutions while maintaining core principles of sovereignty and democratic self-determination. Today's Switzerland represents the culmination of over 7 centuries of political evolution. It's a nation that has managed to balance competing languages, religions, and regional interests while maintaining one of the world's highest standards of living. It's proven that small nations can thrive in a world dominated by superpowers, that neutrality can be a source of strength rather than weakness, and that democracy can work even in complex, diverse societies. But the Swiss story isn't just about political success. It's about the power of determined people to shape their own destiny. From those first mountain communities who refused to bow to imperial authority, to modern Swiss citizens who still gather in town squares to debate and vote on local issues. Switzerland represents something precious and increasingly rare, a society where ordinary people have real control over their government. The lessons of Swiss history extend far beyond Switzerland's borders. In an age of increasing polarization and declining faith in democratic institutions, Switzerland demonstrates that different groups can live together peacefully, that local autonomy and national unity can coexist, and that ordinary citizens can be trusted with real political power. As we face modern challenges from climate change to technological disruption to global inequality, the Swiss experience offers valuable insights. Their approach to problem-solving emphasizes consensus building over confrontation, gradual reform over revolutionary change, and practical solutions over ideological purity. Switzerland's journey from a collection of rebellious mountain communities to a modern, prosperous democracy proves that with determination, wisdom, and a commitment to working together, any group of people can build something extraordinary. In a world that often seems dominated by conflict and division, Switzerland stands as proof that another way is possible. The epic story of Switzerland reminds us that the greatest victories aren't always won on battlefields or in boardrooms. Sometimes, the most important triumph is simply the patient work of building a society where people can live together in peace, prosperity, and freedom. That might be the most inspiring lesson of all from this remarkable nation's incredible 700-year journey.